Let's go to the next one. Ukraine. Definitely wanted to make sure that we highlighted this. Let's go ahead and play some of Vladimir Putin's comments on the news that the U.S. may allow NATO-provided missiles to strike even deeper inside of Russia. So let's play the video and I'm going to read it. Putin says, this is their direct involvement, of course, fundamentally changes the essence, the very nature of the conflict. He continues, this will mean that NATO countries, the United States and European countries, are at war with Russia. If this is the case, considering the change in the very nature of this conflict, we will make corresponding decisions based on the threats that will be created for us. So that was direct quotes here from Vladimir Putin in reaction to some of the news and the debates that are coming out about U.S. policy versus Ukraine. Let's put the next one up there on the screen because this is the most important decision probably that will be made in this war so far. Anthony Blinken, our Secretary of State, hints that the United States will lift arms restrictions on Ukraine using long-range arms inside of Russia. Quote, the decision is understood to have already been made in private, as the Secretary of State says in Kyiv. The U.S. will continue to adapt its policy. Allegedly, they're keeping this on the back burner, and there is no official decision, but right now, there will be a change in restriction on Ukraine's use of missiles, which have a range of approximately 190 miles to, quote, avoid reckless or unnecessary attacks, which is kind of a ridiculous way of framing it, considering that Ukraine literally invaded Russia and continues to actually hold some of the territory that has not been disputed prior to this war. The point is just that the slow bubbling things that are happening inside of Ukraine continue to be massively unstable and detrimental to the overall international order and have the risk of spiraling totally out of control in a highly predictable manner. And if you put it on the backdrop of everything that is happening, if you look at Kursk, for example, Russian advances, Putin and Russian resolve to continue the war, there has been basically zero change to the overall strategic status quo as a result of Ukraine being allowed to use these weapons. And yet, the Ukraine lobby and Kamala and all of the advisors in the White House, Biden and others, they just continue to direct in this policy. 3 years ago, it was totally off the table, this idea of giving Ukraine long-range missiles to strike inside of Russia. Now we're just keep on upping the ante from tanks to F-16s to now to these missiles. It's just totally ridiculous, the way that we whitewash past policy and concerns of the past and arguably give it to them at a time where it's not going to make even that much of a difference. The overall end to the war will not change all that much. So how many more square miles of territory is it worth it? Wall Street Journal has a story up this morning say that the unofficial death toll is somewhere in the nature of 1 million as a result of this war. Yeah, and those are with the fake CIA numbers about Ukrainian dead. So what's the real number? 1.5 million? Something like that? That's a disaster for them, for Russia, for the world.
Horrible. Just absolutely horrible. Yeah, I mean, listen, I guess what people will say in response is, okay, Putin's made a lot of threats before and hasn't necessarily followed through on them. So yeah, he's full of bluster about how this will be a NATO declaration of war against Russia, et cetera, but he's probably just bluffing. And it's like, okay, well, can we at least talk about it? Can we at least really focus the American people's attention on what would be obviously an extraordinary escalation on, these threats from Putin and what we should make of them and, at least have a fulsome debate about where this is going because, we've used this term sleepwalking from the beginning of this war and it just feels more and more accurate of now the initial horror and attention is gone. There's very little coverage of what's going on and what each of these individual decisions mean. And yet they're so incredibly consequential. That's what's really disturbing. And the other thing I'm thinking is, we know how difficult it is for American presidents to bring conflicts to a close because as long as it's ongoing, you can live in the perfect fantasy land where Zelensky regains all control and Putin is vanquished, et cetera, even though that's obviously not going to be reality. The moment you have a conclusion, then there is a hard and fast outcome, which we can then use to debate whether, we should have spent years fighting this war rather than engaged in the peace negotiations, which were available to us at the beginning of this conflict before 1 million people were killed. So that's the logic of ongoing conflicts and endless wars. And of course, the other logic of it is that you have many people who profit directly off of it, and no one really profiting directly off of peace except for the people who benefit from not having their homeland destroyed and fighting and dying. So, Biden right now, he's a lame duck president. His political standing, outside of whatever blowback it has on Kamala Harris, et cetera, his political standing really doesn't matter anymore. So, take the hit, bring this thing to a close, end it, because if it goes into the next administration, whether it's Kamala or Trump, they're both going to look at the same calculus and say, listen, what behooves us is to just kind of keep this thing on a slow burn and maintain the status quo indefinitely and kick the can down the road.
Yes, and let's put this next one up there on the screen. It now appears that if you look at everyone says, oh, nothing without Ukraine, or nothing for Ukraine without Ukraine. I mean, look at this, guys. Look, more Ukrainians today want a negotiated peace to the end of the war than at any time before. It's actually the men who have been drafted and forced into the Ukrainian military who are the only ones who say that we should, quote, fight until it liberates all territory to the 1991 borders. But the highest number than ever before say that they should negotiate with Russia to achieve peace, to, quote, seek a compromise to end the war through negotiations. Now, it's only 43%. You still got 54%, but that is much higher than previous polls of the war have found. And what they say is that it's clear when you take into consideration the death and the population projections, this is, if the longer it goes, the more in benefit of Russia. So for example, population projections of Russia and Ukraine up until 2100 are both dismal. But for Russia, they'll still have well over 100 million people. For the Ukrainians, it starts trending down from a height of 50 million around the Soviet Union collapse to like 5 million. You were talking about a tenfold reduction of the overall population of the country because not only have so many people been killed, so many people have fled. That's a disaster. No civilization can survive that, or at least in the way that they want to, because this entire war is supposedly all about protecting their identity and their sovereignty, etc. So it's clear, if you want the outcome that you allegedly want, then it's pretty clear what you should do. Biden could easily help you get there. Biden will not do it because for Biden, NATO and Ukraine is like a religion. It's like the only thing that still fires his synapses. So we're locked in. We're locked in right now.
That and Zionism, which we're about to get to.
Yeah, right. Yeah, good point.
Hey, if you like that video, hit the like button or leave a comment below. It really helps get the show to more people.
And if you'd like to get the full show ad-free and in your inbox every morning, you can sign up at breakingpoints.com.
That's right. Get the full show, help support the future of independent media at breakingpoints.com.